Big breaking news in the world of college athletics. Oregon and Washington on the verge of joining the Big Ten. That is per multiple reports, including from our very own Dennis Dodd. We will hear from him in just 1 second. The two schools reportedly informed Pac-12 presidents earlier today they plan to accept an invitation from the league. ESPN reporting the Big Ten expected to send formal invitations to the Ducks and the Huskies as soon as later today, with a potential vote happening as well. Oregon and Washington, both charter members of the Pac-12, dating all the way back to 1915. Let's welcome in college football expert and insider Dennis Dodd here. Dennis, just before we came on air, you said this is the tsunami we have been expecting for years. We just didn't think it was going to happen this fast. How did all of this speed up, and specifically what is going on right now with Washington and Oregon?
Yeah, Amanda, I think the reason why this sped up and happened so fast, bottom line, is that the playoff is going to expand to 12 teams in 2024. There's going to be an absolute new contract for the playoff in 2026. And the rights holders needed to know what they were bidding on, what structure it was going to be, because according to projections, that contract is going to be the biggest in college sports history, maybe $2 billion per year for a single rights holder, multiple rights holders to telecast those 11 playoff games beginning in 2024. So I think that was the urgency. As far as Oregon and Washington, I thought this was something that was going to happen in maybe 2 or 3 years when the Big Ten settled in. But I think what you saw with Tony Petitti and his background in television as the new Big Ten commissioner, he wanted to get this done soon. The presidents, as of this morning, look, this was a coin toss whether it was going to happen. I think it came down to money for Oregon and Washington and Fox and the Big Ten. Oregon and Washington needed more money than they were offered, about 35 to 40 million, because they weren't going to get a full share. I mean, we're talking about two schools, the biggest brands left on the board. I'm not including Florida State because they have nowhere to go. I'm not including Notre Dame because they're staying independent. The Big Ten got the two best brands left on the board. So it was just a matter of communicating that money. And those schools individually didn't want to be the one that pulled the thread, that pulled apart the Pac-12. I think that's going to happen now. I think in short order, we're going to see Arizona State, and Utah join the Big 12. And then you won't have enough teams to officially be a conference in the NCAA's eyes. And then who picks over the remains? Does Stanford go independent? You know, where does Cal go? Does Oregon State and Washington State end up in the Mountain West? Is the American in play? Because I'm hearing that right now. The American Athletic Conference may be in play for some of these teams. So it's going to happen in short order, Amanda.
You see the top of that full screen there. Is this the end of the Pac-12? And Dennis, I was listening to you yesterday, and you basically said if Oregon and Washington leave, we are basically looking at the end of the Pac-12. If you're the Pac-12 right now, is there any way, with the other schools you mentioned, Arizona State, Utah, looking at the Big 12, is there any way to salvage this conference where it stands?
Well, the only way they could salvage it is just being some kind of hybrid conference with the Mountain West. I think that's what we're talking about right now. I don't know what the money would be for whatever this is, these 7 remaining teams. It was $20 million a school in the old Apple deal that we learned all the way back on Monday. And then there was a report that the Apple deal, the offer, is going to expire at the end of the week. So I don't think there's much hope. Arizona, as we know, last night, the Big 12 presidents voted to extend an invitation. The regents in Arizona had not voted. There was some foot dragging by Arizona State's president, Michael Crow. We really don't know about Utah at this point. So there's a decision to be made. So it looks like, again, Arizona is going to be gone. So that puts it down to 6. So then it just becomes a hybrid, I think, of the Mountain West, or collapses altogether to the 4 wins.
USC, UCLA, they're joining the Big Ten next season. I mean, how quickly could we see Oregon and Washington jump over if this deal does get done in the next 24 hours or so?
For the reasons I just mentioned, I think this is their last season in the Pac-12. Again, they want, the rights holders want certainty for 2024, particularly 2026 when the new negotiations begin. But the 12-team playoff begins next year. And within the next year, I forgot to add this, they will begin negotiations on that 26 contract. That's typically how these things go, 18 months out, 2 years out. And they need to know who's going to play where. So I would say, I think that's probably going to come here within minutes, if not hours, that this is going to start in 2024, because It's pretty easy. The Pac-12 contract expires July 1st, 2024.
Dennis, you mentioned, and we're a little short on time here, we mentioned look at Arizona being the next domino to fall, going over to the Big 12, potentially Arizona State and Utah. We had Chip Patterson on just a couple of seconds ago. He said, look, this is the end of the Pac-12 as we know it. He said, I would argue this is the end of the Big 10 as we know it, not having, teams within same regions and stuff like that. We've talked about these super conferences before. The landscape of college football, what is this going to look like, say, in 5 years?
Well, it's just what I mentioned up top, Amanda. The big one is what people thought would happen again in 10 years, 4 16-team conferences. Okay, the Big Ten is going to be 18, maybe more, but we're going to lose a power conference. We're going to lose the Pac-12 as a viable conference. Really quick, the 5 Power 5 schools each get $80 million from the playoff every year because they're Power 5 conferences. Economics are going to dictate who the Power 5 conferences are, and you see them reorganizing around that money. There's going to be 4 major conferences, maybe less if you count the SEC and Big Ten now getting up and running away from everybody else. But we'll find out in a year or two when they negotiate that deal that I'm talking about, when they get in that room and the SEC and Big Ten say, we're going to take this share, the rest of you guys can split up everything else.
Dennis Dodd, we appreciate it. We know you're on the phone a lot, checking all of your messages because things are happening as we speak. We'll check in with you very soon. Thank you for the latest.
And we've got breaking news out of college football, where Oregon and Washington are on the verge of joining the Big Ten. That is according to multiple reports. The 2 schools reportedly informed the Pac-12 presidents earlier today that they plan to accept an invitation from the league. ESPN reports that the Big Ten is expected to send formal invitations to the Ducks and the Huskies later today, with a potential vote happening as well. Oregon, Washington, both charter members of the conference dating back to 1915. So here's a look at the Pac-12, maybe we should say the Pac-7 by now. USC, UCLA, Colorado already confirmed to be moving. Washington and Oregon are expected to leave the conference. That news just coming down. And then that leaves Arizona, who is widely reported to join the Big 12 at some point Friday. And for more on this, we have college football writer Tom Fornelli joining us with that big breaking news coming down this hour. Washington, Oregon making the move to the Big 10. Tom, you are a Big Ten guy. When I think Illinois, when I think #1 Illinois fan, that is you through and through. So what was your first reaction when you're hearing all of this news about Oregon and Washington making the move to the Big Ten?
My honest reaction was why. I didn't quite understand why the Big Ten felt the need to do this. Of course, I never understood why the Big Ten felt the need to go get USC and UCLA, but once that, domino was started rolling down the track there, I don't think there was any stopping it. And looking at the situation in the Pac-12, to which the conference seems to be, hanging on by a thread, with Colorado already returning to the Big 12, Arizona seemingly ready to follow, and just no solidified television deal. When there's that kind of instability, these kind of things happen. So if you're the Big Ten and you've got USC and UCLA and you've had some concerns about maybe getting them travel partners or further expanding to the West Coast instead of just having those 2 out there solo, Oregon and Washington makes sense from that aspect. But at the same time, with a lot of the reports we have seen today, which, again, 5 minutes from now, everything might be completely different. That has been the tenor of the day. But even from the reports of this happening, you've seen reports that not everybody in the Big Ten was fully on board, that there was some hesitancy with extending invitations to Oregon and Washington, and yet they're doing it anyway, which kind of brings me back to the why. I don't understand, as a Big Ten fan, and knowing a lot of other Big Ten alumni and fans, I do not know many people who are asking for this. I do not know many people who are excited about it. And if on the other side, if I'm an Oregon or Washington fan, why am I excited about playing Minnesota instead of Oregon State or Washington State, my rivals? It's the reality of college football right now, where none of it really makes much sense, but it does make money.
All right, yeah, it seems to always come down to the money, Tom, and I want to talk more about the future of college football, right? It seems like rivalries are going to be broken up by this. We talked to Chip Patterson a little bit earlier, and he had said the Big Ten as we know it, college football as we know it, is completely changing. He doesn't think the fans are ready. Do you think part of this realignment has maybe hurt the pageantry of college football, especially for all the fan bases involved?
I do definitely think it has hurt. Whether or not they'll be able to recover from it, I don't know. I can't predict the future. But in the immediate sense, rivalry is one of the things that has made this sport special throughout the years. I mean, obviously, the college football playoff is a huge focal point, playing for national titles, all of that stuff. But realistically, there are only a few schools in any given season who have a shot of playing for a national title. For most college football fans, it's about playing in your conference and beating your rivals, so getting bragging rights against your friends and your family members and just the schools you don't like. And then you kind of do this where you take Oregon and Washington and you're throwing them in the Big Ten and you're removing them from Oregon State, the Civil War. You're removing them from Washington State, the Apple Cup, and you're forcing them to play a bunch of teams that they have absolutely no history with except for maybe a few bowl games here and there over the last century. And you're kind of forcing it upon them and saying, all right, you two are best friends now, or you're rivals. And it's just hard for that to be forced and form on its own. So I do think definitely in the short term, this hurts. And I also think that there's a sense where it kind of feels like if you are a college football fan, you're getting hit over the head repeatedly with this. Like, I feel like we are on the track to having the 2 super leagues of 24 teams. And if that's the ultimate destination, there's a part of me that wishes we would just jump to it right now instead of having every offseason being inundated with this school's leaving for this conference, this school's leaving for this conference. It's like, let's just get there before everybody's worn out and tired of all the realignment talk by the time we get to the games. Because again, we're in early August. The college football season is starting in a few weeks. I can't remember the last time anybody asked me a question about a game or a team this season. The only questions I've been getting, whether, here or on radio or in any aspect on the podcast, has been about conference realignment. And I do not think that is a good thing for the interest in the sport long term.
So, Tom, obviously, you're a college football writer. And do you think all of this realignment news is kind of taking away from what people should actually care about when it comes to college football?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I get that it's interesting, it's fun, it's hypotheticals, but the hypotheticals are no longer hypothetical anymore. It's just reality. We are watching in real time the Pac-12 be torn apart, just like a few years ago we were watching the Big 12 that was on its, deathbed as people were kind of picking it apart. Thankfully, the Big 12 rallied and survived. Maybe there's a chance that the same could happen for the Pac-12, but the truth is, if the Pac-12 survives, it'll be at the expense of another conference, the Mountain West. It's just a chain reaction that does not stop. And at the end, there are fans of these schools who are kind of being held hostages by, conference commissioners, television networks who have no idea what their future is. And they just want to go back to a time where they can sit down on a Saturday and watch their team play in the fall against the rival. And they're losing that.
Tom, you mentioned the future, so we kind of want to play matchmaker, some more hypotheticals here. When you think Big Ten rivalries right now, obviously Michigan, Ohio State, that certainly comes to mind. But can you maybe create a new rivalry for us inside of the Big Ten years to come when you're thinking of all these new teams joining?
The one rivalry I want to see happen, and the only positive I saw out of USC joining the Big Ten at the time was I wanted the rivalry between USC and Michigan State. Spartans versus Trojans. It is just a natural rivalry. We can get a big Trojan horse trophy, whatever you want to do, because the Big Ten loves rivalry trophies, so at least we're getting a chance to add more of those. That is one quote-unquote natural rivalry I think can form from all this. But again, it does feel forced. But hopefully, the one thing that truly leads to rivalries are meaningful games. Games with results that matter to both fan bases. Somebody getting hurt feelings, somebody being happy. Hopefully, we start to see a lot more of that and a lot less of where will this team be playing next year.
Hey, Trojan Spartan sounds like a pretty cool rivalry to me.
So there's been a lot of big breaking news out of the world of college football today and college basketball, college athletics in general. But because we've talked so much about football, we're going to talk about basketball. So here be the dealio. Oregon, Washington on the verge of joining the Big Ten. That is per multiple reports. The 2 schools reportedly informed Pac-12 presidents earlier today they do plan to accept an invitation from the league. ESPN reporting the Big Ten expected to send that formal invitation later today. Also a potential vote coming down today as well. Oregon, Washington, both charter members of the Pac-12, that dating back all the way to 1915. But as mentioned, we've been talking a lot about the world of football. We do want to focus on the massive impact it has on the world of college basketball. For more on that, let's welcome in the host of the Eye on College Basketball podcast, Matt Norlander. So, Matt, there's also some things with the Big 12, arguably the best conference when it comes to college basketball. We're going to get to that in a second. But let's start with Oregon and Washington making that jump over to the Big 10 potentially.
Yeah, first of all, it's been absurd to see the news cycle and the reactions and the pre-reactions and the post-reactions to all of this. But yes, as Oregon and Washington now prepare for their formal invite and official announcement of joining the Big Ten, from a basketball standpoint, I'm not sure how this makes their institutions better. And it kind of speaks to the broader impacts of what's at play with college sports here. Everything is being done for football, but none of these moves are really improving, in my opinion, and in the opinion, by the way, of plenty of people at the college sports level, of what's happening with college athletes, student athletes moving forward, like introducing much more travel in all sports, not just football, not just men's and women's basketball, everywhere. I'm not convinced that Oregon's going to be a better program in the Big Ten than it was in the Pac-12, and the same goes for Washington. This also puts, coaches' jobs at risk, because with every major change that happens to an athletic department, to a program, obviously it kind of resets expectations moving forward. Mike Hopkins, the basketball coach at Washington, is already entering a hot seat season. So as all of this swirls, Amanda, a couple of conversations that I've had with people particularly affiliated with Pac-12 institutions, it's not a happy time. There's not like a lot of eagerness that this is all happening. And I think that there is a chance that that some of the soul of college sports is being scraped away here. And we have a conference now, a power conference, a former power conference in the Pac-12 on the brink of outright extinction. And I haven't heard one person describe or detail why this is a good thing for the overall industry. In fact, it's pretty sad how it's happened in the way that it's unfolded.
So dive into that a little bit more, because, when people talk about it when it comes to college football, yes, they may not like it, but they're still talking about it with excitement. They're still going to watch their teams play, and maybe the rivalries are a little, jilted there. But overall, for college athletics, why are you not loving this? Why is this not good for college athletics?
Because college athletics for decades and decades and decades and decades and decades, and I'm talking 80, 90, 100 years, was built upon many things, and some of them obviously were business oriented, but you had this notion of colloquialism. You had a region, you had a territory, you had people that you went to school with, or people that you work with, that they might have gone to this school or that school. You are from similar parts of the country, and from that, natural rivalries, relationships, they build, and you build that, and there is something very collegial about that. And I understand the business forces that are at play, by the way, which there's no guarantee that the state of the college sports market and industry right now in 2023, these are all projections on what it might look like in 2028, in 2033, in 2035. No one has any idea. We could look up in 5 or 6 years and discover this was a horrendous decision. But you are soul scraping a lot of what makes college sports unique, endearing. You might have Washington and Washington State, the Apple Cup just evaporate, right? Oregon State, that could just, the rivalry itself just getting torn away. And yeah, there are real impacts. There are a lot of drawbacks to this. And beyond all of that, 18 teams is not a conference, all right? That might as well be an entirely new union unto itself. 16 is barely manageable. 18 from a scheduling standpoint is outright horrific. And we might not be that far away from getting to 20 or 22 eventually. So there will be a lot of logistical challenge with this. And conferences themselves, when they are 8, 10, 12 teams, there's inherent balance to them, be it in football, basketball, when it comes to building out NCAA tournament resumes. A lot of that is going to be stripped away. And so in the years to come, I can see it coming 100 miles away. You are going to have, in my opinion, more imbalance than ever before in college sports. And I would argue that is not a good thing.
Especially when you look at the Big Ten and the SEC. Talk to us, though, about the Big 12, because Arizona looks like it's finalizing its move to the Big 12 with all of this happening. ASU, Utah, they've also been spoken about as well. What potentially could we see the Big 12 looking like when it is just so dominant already? Are we going to see that imbalance? Do you see these teams fitting in? What do you think?
Yeah, there's still so much left to be uncovered here. So, all right, from the reporting end, here's what I can report. yes, Arizona is in the midst of accepting that going to the Big 12 should be something that it does. However, I spoke with 3 sources connected to those schools this week, and all of them emphatically said Arizona and Arizona State will not sever. They will not split. It would be a great surprise. Never say never, but the idea that Arizona would be in one league and Arizona State would not be in the same league can't be envisioned by people that, again, know those programs well. So with that in mind, the Big 12 needs to get to a point where it was already approved to go to 14 teams, and Arizona was the 14th team. Now, will it go to 16? Team 15 would be Arizona State. Team 16, you would think, would be Utah, and it would go along with. We are just waiting for those stages, I guess, to formally happen behind the scenes. This is the best basketball conference in the country, although I will say the bigger you get, the more likely you are to lose that standing. The Big 12 has been the best basketball league in America because it has been a 10, 11, 12-team operation, and there has not been a soggy bottom, so to speak. So there is that. And then, oh, by the way, when we talk about the Big 10 going to 18 teams, there's Brett Yormark, who has been the most outwardly ambitious and outspoken conference commissioner by far. Is he going to be good at 16? He's got New York ties. He wants UConn in. Team 17 has been flirting with Gonzaga for more than a year, and I believe Gonzaga would jump to the Big 12 if invited. Are those Team 17 and 18? Is the Big 12 actually going to go beyond just trying to add football schools and bring in more basketball cachet already to its super strong basketball league? I think those options are still on the table. And I think our conference realignment discussion is not going to slow down over the weekend.
Well, especially when it comes to basketball, and we think of football crisscrossing the country, but Gonzaga going to the Big 12 country. But as you mentioned, these regions may not exist anymore. Now, mentioning Gonzaga, it kind of mentions what I want to talk about. We've been talking a lot about the Power 5 conferences, maybe some super conferences we're going to see, but there are conferences out there that are much more dominant in the world of basketball than they are in the world of college football, like the West Coast Conference. What is this going to do to these smaller conferences that are still heavy hitters in basketball, but not football?
Yeah, listen, the ripple effects are major, and it remains to be seen what will happen there. But yes, the West Coast Conference, which has been boosted up by Gonzaga forever, and needs Gonzaga to have any kind of validity in the college basketball landscape, right? And conversely, other side of the country, the Big East, a very proud basketball. It doesn't have football anymore. UConn just won a national championship. I mean, I'm in the process of doing Candid Coaches, a series we do every year at CBS Sports, where we poll 100 college basketball coaches on a variety of issues. And one of the questions we have is, should UConn stay in the Big East or go to the Big 12? I'm not going to spoil all the results. I'm just telling you that the Big East is winning that poll question, and to no surprise whatsoever. So those leagues, they're at risk of being hampered by expansion that is so overwhelmingly driven by football, when there's something to be said about having an identity, having a fit, knowing where you belong, and thriving because of it. I was just at the Final Four this past spring, Amanda. I sat in the press room when Dan Hurley specifically cited why moving back to the Big East enabled UConn in that moment, as he spoke, to get to a Final Four, and then obviously a short while later they won the national championship. So do I think that Gonzaga and UConn are still engaging in talks with the Big 12 and open to having those conversations about leaving their current conferences? I do. Will it happen? That remains to be seen, because the Arizona State, and Utah pieces still need to be figured out first. And one of the biggest surprises about Friday here is that the Big 10 moved with Oregon and Washington. It moved first and effectively, in my opinion, killed the Pac-12. It started with the USC UCLA move, and now a year later, here we have it with Oregon and Washington joining them, and now basically having a West Coast, outpost, if you will, for an 18-team conference.
The same sentiment that most of our analysts have, whether it is in the world of college football or basketball. Matt, the host of Eye on College Basketball Podcast, really quickly, I know you guys have been doing summer shoot-around. We're going to promo your podcast, but tell us when we can expect maybe you guys talking about this coming up.
We will talk about this on the podcast coming up next week, in addition to all our shoot-around episodes. A big mailbag episode as well. There's plenty to discuss from a basketball angle, and we will touch on that too.
Matt Norlander, we appreciate it.